You can have mandatory hijab regulation, you can have the blasphemy law, you can have religious harmony, but for them, the crown jewel is the criminal code. If you can Islamize the criminal code, if you can Shariatize the criminal code, thus it is an Islamic state.
Andreas Harsono has been the Indonesia representative for Human Rights Watch since 2008. He's been a foreign correspondent and the author of 5 books, most recently, Race, Islam, and Power, Ethnic and Religious Violence in Post-Suharto Indonesia. In the 20 years since Suharto was forced from office, the country's been a good news story of sorts, free and fair elections, and unlike the Suharto era, the military has no formal role in government. But in recent years, the rights of women, LGBT people, and religious minorities have increasingly been under threat, owing to the rise of religious conservatism. He joined me to talk about Indonesia's human rights record and what inspired him to become a journalist and activist. He shared a personal account of how the 1965 massacre of suspected communists, an episode thought to have killed at least 500,000, affected his family. Okay, Andreas Harsono, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Last year, you published a book. It was 15 years in the making. Race, Islam, and Power, Ethnic and Religious Violence in Post-Suharto Indonesia. And it's more of a travelogue, isn't it? It starts from the very western part of Indonesia, in Sabang, and goes all the way to West Papua. And throughout, you chronicle pockets of violence just after the fall of Suharto and the years since then. And I wondered if you would be able to tell us a little about Malia in Ambon. You could tell us a little bit about that episode in 2003, I think.
She is a woman whom I interviewed in Ambon. She is a Muslim, and she was the one who started to recall, to reconstruct what happened on January 19, 1999, when the violence between Muslim and Christian in the Molucas Island began. She was there. She witnessed some of the most brutal violence. She basically told me that humans were being cut like fishes and blood everywhere. It began over a quarrel between a Christian bus driver and a Muslim migrant parking truck, basically, in the Ambon terminal. The truck asked for some money, protection money, like usual, every day. But it was the Idul Fitri Muslim holiday, and the Christian bus driver told him to wait. So he went out again. The second round, the bus driver entered the bus terminal. He was asked for money once again. And this time, the Muslim threatened with a small knife. The Christian bus driver got angry. He ran back to his house near the terminal and came back with a machete. That was the starting point of the violence in Ambon, Seram Island, in which about 10,000 people were killed. And later that year, it went to Ternate and Halmahera Island, starting in Tidore Island, killing in 5 years, 15,000 people were killed.
These are just tit for tat,
yes.
Sectarian violence.
Slightly
violence.
Different in the north, because in the north it was between the yellow and the white. The white, predominantly conservative Muslim from Tidore Island. Meanwhile, the yellow, who are also mainly Muslim, but also with Christian, they are mainly with the Tidore Sultanate. So these are two old sultanates that had been fighting once against another as two different identities for centuries. And they used to side with the Spanish and with the Portuguese, later with the Dutch, whoever, and fighting for centuries. And this time they kill each other, 15,000. As a context, today in Syria, we are also seeing a war, and it killed about 14,000 people.
Remarkable.
Meanwhile, in the Molucas archipelago itself, 25,000 were killed.
And during the time of Suharto, was the new order able to keep a lid on this?
Basically with authoritarian, with repression, with suppression of freedom of expression, free press, freedom of association, freedom of religion, they are all suppressed.
Well, Human Rights Watch last year published a report, your organization, saying that the human rights record for Indonesia is actually slipping. Is it just getting worse?
In general, if we take a look at the slope of religious freedom in Indonesia, I think it is getting worse. The Ministry of Religious Affairs was established in 1946 January by then Prime Minister Sultan Syahrir. It was a compromise between the secular politician and the Islamist politician as a middle ground by dropping the so-called Islamic Sharia from the constitution, but as a bridge to then Indonesia and the future of Indonesia, they agreed to set up the Ministry of Religious Affairs. The Blasphemy Law Office, or in Indonesia we call it Bakor Pakem, Badan Pengawas Aliran Kepercayaan, was established in 1952 under the Ministry of Religious Affairs. But the blasphemy law itself was only written in 1965. So the idea since the very beginning is to make Islam as the first among equal. So over the last 40 years until 2020, we are seeing more and more regulation that discriminate non-Islam, non-Sunni minorities. Over the last 70 years, we are also seeing more and more institutions to facilitate discriminations against non-Islam, non-Sunni minorities.
Is it the Ministry of Religious Affairs that's driving this?
There are many institutions, at least four, the most important. Ministry of Religious Affairs, 1946. The Blasphemy Law Office, 1952. The Indonesian Ulama Council, 1982. And the so-called Religious Harmony Forum, 2006. So these are the four institutions that issue regulation after regulation to cut the spaces of, let's say, Christian or Buddhist or non-believers or Ahmadiyya or Shia, and of course, women and LGBT individual.
The 2006 Religious Harmony Council, that was significant in the creation of some other laws, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The principle of religious harmony is the majority should protect the minorities, and the minorities should respect the majority. In practice, the government set up the so-called Religious Harmony Forum as advisory bodies attached to all mayors, all regions, and of course the president and governors. On the provincial level, this advisory forum has 21 clerics to be members. And on the Regency city level, 17. The problem is this membership should be, quote, proportional, unquote, with the religiosity of each province, each city, each regency.
So it would be majority Hindu, say in
Let's
Bali.
say in Bali,
in Denpasar, it would be,
it is
skewed toward
Hindu control.
Right.
In Papua, it is Christian control.
controlled, right?
But of course, Indonesia is mostly Muslim.
Especially in the West, right?
Yeah, in Java, Sumatra, they are all Muslim, predominantly Muslim area. Of Indonesia, 34 provinces, only 4 are Christian dominated and 1 Hindu dominated, and the rest are Muslim dominated. And these are the areas where many closure of churches, Ahmadiyya mosques, but mostly churches, because Christian, of course, is the second largest religion after Islam in Indonesia. Constitutionally, religious harmony principle replaces the constitutional principle of religious freedom, where everyone is equal.
Religious freedom, so long as the prescribed religions, right? The 6 religions. If you're Shia, maybe not so much.
Well, the 6 prescribed religion only appear with the blasphemy law in 1965.
when Sukarno would like to make blasphemy a crime, the question is, what religion that we should protect? Then Sukarno wrote 6 religions: Islam, Protestantism, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, on that order. Although Sukarno said it doesn't mean that other religions cannot exist in Indonesia, but only these 6 are quote-unquote protected against blasphemy. So that is the beginning when the principle of religious freedom was being corroded. One regulation at a time, regulation after regulation. And now we have more than 770 discriminatory regulations against religious minorities, women, and LGBT.
And related to that are attempts that we saw last year, or ongoing attempts to change the criminal code to basically get into every nook and cranny.
This criminal code is very important for the Islamists because you can have mandatory hijab regulation, you can have the blasphemy law, you can have religious harmony, but for them, the crown jewel is the criminal code. If you can Islamize the criminal code, if you can Shariatize the criminal code, thus it is an Islamic state.
Their ultimate goal is Sharia?
Yes, they want to implement what they claim to be the Islamic Sharia. Of course, the Islamic Sharia is not a single interpretation. It has multiple interpretations. And of course, the so-called Islamic Sharia had been manipulated for many, many years, decades, centuries, for multiple goals.
What do you think are the tenets of Islamic law that they would like to see introduced here? I realize that there are many different interpretations of Islamic law. What would they like to see introduced here, do you think?
They basically want Islam and the state administration to be combined as one. There should be no separation between the state and Islam. That is the basic argument of people who would like to advocate for the Sharia.
And when we say they, what organizations specifically do you have in mind?
Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic Defenders Front, Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, and much smaller other Islamist organizations. They also would like to do that.
The killings in 1965 were among the worst atrocities committed anywhere during the second half of the 20th century. These suspected communists were actually more like ethnic Chinese, leftists, artists, teachers, trade unionists, and mass graves have been found since then and documented for decades. In 2016, though, President Joko Widodo, making good on a campaign promise back in 2014, convened a symposium that for the first time gave NGOs and victims a chance to get their account of the atrocities on the record. And it included notables like Agus Wijoyo. He was the son of one of the murdered generals, Sutoyo. And this gave the symposium an air of legitimacy. It didn't result, though, in any resolution, let alone an apology to the victims on behalf of the military. And since then, I can honestly say that most Indonesians are still in the dark. In 2014, you wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and in it you described what those 1965 purges, the mass killings that took something like 500,000 lives, maybe more. You explained what it meant for you. Can you tell us about that?
I was born in 1965, the year of living dangerously. I was only 5 weeks old when the mass killing started to appear in our hometown. Later, much later, decades later, we found mass grave in my hometown, Jember, in East Java. But I was young, of course. After the situation started to calm down, my father brought me back to Jember. And this gentleman, Mantuka, who worked for my family for decades until he retired, he was the one who basically took care of me. He told me that there was a river next to our house where many dead bodies were seen at the time, 1965, 1966. And he told me one morning, early in the morning, when he cycled, he heard a baby cry on that river. There were some people looking around. He also stopped. It was pretty quiet at the time. Jember is not a big city. And he stopped and he saw a baby sucking its mother breast on a bamboo or raft on the river, stuck on the bank of the river. And the mother was dead. She was obviously killed because of these anti-communist birds with her baby in her arm. The baby is still alive. That was the story that stuck in my mind. I was growing up always looking at that river. The name is Kali Jombo or Jombo River. Until now, every time I pass that river, which is close to our shop, I still remember that story.
How old are you when he told you that story?
I
You were
did
a
not
baby when it
remember.
happened. You're still...
I did not remember, but it was maybe 7, 8 years old, grade 1, grade 2, primary school.
At what point did it occur to you that this is not normal? Did you know then that it was weird, or did it just this is the way everything is?
I knew that I was growing up in a dark period of Indonesia. I have another person who taught me a lot about the violence. She was my Mandarin teacher. I'm ethnically Chinese.
Your father is ethnic Chinese,
Yes.
and so you're half.
I'm mixed
right?
blood,
Mixed
but
blood.
basically my father thought that I need to understand this language. I do not until now.
Do you speak Mandarin?
No, I don't speak.
All right.
But at least they were trying to have me a tutor, a Mandarin tutor, coming to our house. So she was a Mandarin school, high school student when 1965-66 happened. And she sometimes told us stories about how the largest Chinese language school in Jember was attacked and later seized by the military. Later, it became the campus of an Islamic institute in Jember.
And the ethnic Chinese were coming in were targeted by security services and thugs.
Yeah.
Because of their suspicion that they were communists.
Yeah.
Is that really
Exactly.
because they were communists, or just because it was just ethnic? It was a vendetta that goes back for centuries.
It is both of anti-Chinese sentiment. It was also because of the large involvement of Beijing in agreeing, or it is still not clear about the communist attempt, the elite Communist Party attempt to seize power in September 1965.
And this was the assassination of the six
the
generals.
kidnapping and killing of 6 generals.
To what extent is this studied in school and openly discussed? This does seem like one of the late 20th century's genocide crimes. Yeah. What is Indonesia's comfort level with discussing it now?
The version that Indonesian students learn at school, from primary to high school, also universities, is the military version. That the military version was that the communists was trying to seize power from then President Sukarno, and they kidnapped and killed these 6 generals. The army tried to save the nation. They banned the communists. They also arrested and jailed many communists, put them on Buru Island. This is in a bid to save the nation.
Saving the nation from the foreigner.
Yeah.
From outside aggression.
Yes. And of course, Indonesia-China diplomatic ties was severe in 1966 and only resumed decades later.
Is there any tolerance at all to a revision of the history, to revisiting and discussing more openly?
No. After the fall of Suharto in 1998, there was a movement among historians to revise the history book. The military rejected. Some Islamist organizations also rejected. There were even threats of violence against those historians. The subject was pretty simple. In Indonesian history book, we always refer to that night as G30S/PKI. It stands for Gerakan 30 September, the movement of September 30th / Partai Komunis Indonesia. What the historian would like to do is just wrote G30S without the communists, because the involvement of the Communist Party was still murky until now. The Politburo obviously knew about the plan, but the Central Committee of the Communist Party did not know. Many of the Central Committee members did not know. And of course, millions of communist members throughout Indonesia did not know about such a plan. One theory is that it was only an internal conflict within the Indonesian army, because of course those that kidnapped the general, murdered the general, were also army men.
But it's been 55 years. What prevents Indonesia from revisiting it now?
I think the public is not ready. According to General Agus Widodo, whose father was one of the 6 generals killed in 1965, who himself is trying to reopen and to revisit the official history of the killing of 1965, 66, 67, 68. He himself told me that the Indonesian public is not ready. It might take 1 or 2 more generations. I trust him. He's trying. He himself is a victim. His father was killed, but he met with the children of D.N. Aidit, the Communist Party chairman at the time, and many other victims. They already have their own association. They are both, children of those involved in the killing, perpetrators and murderers and whoever, and they want to have a brighter future for Indonesia. But the public is not ready.
Last question. President Joko Widodo came to office promising a series of reforms and initiatives that would confront Indonesia's checkered human rights past. Visits to Papua, the Commission on 1965. How do you think history will judge him?
He did not deliver. He tried to make some of his commitment on West Papua, releasing political prisoners, promising that foreign journalists can go to Papua, trying to set up this 1965 symposium, but because of multiple factors, he did not deliver. His second term, I still do hope he might deliver, although there are symptoms that he will not also do that, because of the allies that he had picked up are all basically anti-human rights personalities.
Multiple factors, for example?
The rise of Islamism, the rise of the military figures surrounding Jokowi. So his hands are tied. I'm afraid he has no enough political capital to deliver what he had promised. If my prediction is correct, and I'm afraid I'm wrong, he might be remembered as at least infrastructure president, development president, developmentalism, and that's enough, I think.
And that's another episode of On the Level. Our producer is Stephen Handoko. Ismi Ulfa is our graphic designer. Our music is courtesy of Poddington Bear. I'm Jeff Hutton. Thanks for listening.